Okay, so first of all, thank you very much, Piero, for this invitation. I always enjoy the opportunity to present science to a lay audience. First, because usually lay people care more about what I say, and then also because my mission is really to help people using science to live a healthier and happier life. Through my research and my teaching. If my research could be a painting, it would be this painting, and not because the author is Italian, Giuseppe Arciboldo, a famous painter of the 16th century, but because he seemed to know that what we eat shapes who we are. And the focus of my research is investigating the give and take, the conversation between, on one side, our genes, and the other side, our diet. So, on one side, our genes can affect our response to food through nutrigenetics. And on the other side, the food we eat can affect the expression, the activity of our genes through nutrigenomics, which is a process mediated by epigenetics. I also teach several courses at Stanford, in person and online, that are centered around the theme of diet, genetic, and lifestyle. And on one side, my research fuels my teaching, but on the other side, really, my teaching is my fuel, is my source of motivation and inspiration, new ideas. My students often tell me that they come out of my courses with new motivation to take action on their life and improve their health. And so I hope that with this talk, I can give you a taste of this so that you can bring home some messages to improve your health. So today you will learn about what is epigenetics and how it is different from genetics, how diet impacts our epigenetic and health, and how epigenetics can help us take ownership of our health. So, understanding what is epigenetics and how it is different from genetics is especially important now that we see a lot of companies that are using genetic testing to make predictions about what we should eat, where, what music should we listen to, and so on. These companies work in the space of precision health, which is really a paradigm shift towards a more personalized approach to healthcare, in which we can predict, prevent, and cure disease precisely by measuring biomarkers, so people's unique characteristics. But the problem is that most of these companies measure only one of these characteristics, the genes. But actually we know that there are other markers called lifestyle omics, where omics is a word that describes the entire set of markers within a given pathway. And these lifestyle omics comprise epigenomics, exposomics, so the entire sets of environmental factors we are exposed to, the metabolome, all the metabolites in our body, the proteome, all the proteins in our body, and the microbiome, the universe of microbes on us and within us. And the magic of the lifestyle omics is that they are affected by what we do. So to a certain extent, we have control on these biomarkers, and these contribute to our molecular fingerprint, to who we are. So why do we need to integrate genetic testing with lifestyle omics for making precise health predictions? Let's have a quick genetic refresher. As you remember, so the DNA in our cells contains the sequence for making the sequence of amino acids that build up the proteins in our body. And a project that was running for 1990 to 2003, the Human Genome Project, was a multi-billion project aiming at determining the entire sequence of the human DNA or human genome. And there was a lot of hope behind this project. Scientists were very excited and were literally betting on how many genes would turn up when the human genome would be finally mapped. I was excited too in the year 2000. That was the year when I started university, and actually I have to say that this is one of the reasons why I decided to study molecular biology. But the results of the Human Genome Project produced some shocking surprises. And the first shocking surprise is that we humans have the same number of genes, more or less, than simple organisms such as mice, fruit flies, and worms, and 50 times fewer than an onion. The second shocking surprise was that genes account for only 2% of our DNA. And if that wasn't enough to hurt our genetic egos, there is a third shocking surprise. And that your DNA is actually 99.9 similar to any other person's DNA. So really, our DNA explains only 0.1% of the difference between each other. And so perhaps it's not surprising that according to my 23andMe report, I am 72% likely to have straight hair. For the same reason, it's also perhaps not surprising that during the study that we are doing at Stanford, so we were looking at genes that could predict the response to a low-fat or a low-carbohydrate diet in a very big randomized clinical trials, including 609 obese or overweight people. And actually, we could not confirm any association between 3 genes that were reported to be associated with a response to low-fat and low-carb, and the actual weight loss of our participants. And I have to warn you, in general, so genetic predictions are tricky, but especially for diet type and macronutrient compositions, because to the complexity of the genomics, you have to add the complexity of nutrition science. For example, what is low carb? What is low fat? This has been defined in many different ways in the past. So, you know, a study that associates a response with a good response with a low carbohydrate diet, where a low carbohydrate diet can be 40% of carbs or 5% of carbs. So it doesn't really mean anything. So it's really, really not reliable. So we are now looking at epigenetics. What is epigenetics? You may remember the cover of the Time magazine 2008 stating that, so your DNA isn't your destiny. The new science of epigenetics reveals how the choices you make can change your genes and those of your kids. So let's look at what is epigenetics and how it is different from genetics. If your DNA is your genome, then your epigenome is actually a set of molecular markers, chemical groups, that lay on the top of your DNA and can turn genes on or off, just like a dimmer switch can modulate lights up and down in a room. And these can explain why we have different cell types in our body. Fat cells, brain cells, liver cells, all told, more than 200 types of cells that all share the same DNA, the same information. So how it is possible? Well, think of the DNA as the genome as a hardware. Then the epigenome is a software that turns on specific genes in different cells, and only those genes that are required for the cell function and identity. To understand the software, we should really mention two important properties of the epigenome: the epigenetic flexibility and memory. So, unlike genes, epigenetic marks are flexible and dynamically remodeled by the environment. And when the egg cell and the sperm cell fuse together, actually all the epigenetic marks are removed. This is how we come to the world. So the first embryonic stem cells are stem cells because they are epigenetically naked. So they don't have epigenetic marks to instruct the cell on which genes to turn on and off. So they can potentially become any type of cells. Only when these cells start to acquire epigenetic marks, then they do differentiate in the different cell types that make up our tissues. And that's why the pregnancy is such an important time for environmental exposures that can have long-term effects on our epigenome. These environmental exposures include diet, of course, pollutants, stress, drugs, chemicals, and additives. And the way they communicate with our genes is that they actually modulate the activity of enzymes, proteins, that can either write, erase, or read epigenetic modifications on our genes, thus affecting downstream gene expression. So you can think of your epigenome as a set of sticky notes on your genes. These sticky notes can store a memory of our life exposure. And this is due to a delicate balance between epigenetic flexibility, the ability of being affected by the environment, and stability, because the epigenetic modifications are also stable through cell division and can be inherited by the daughter cells. And this gives the epigenome the ability to respond to the environment and remember. So usually the notes that are taken before our birth tend to be permanent, as if written with a pen. whereas the notes that are written after our birth tend to be potentially reversible, as if written with a pencil. And both pen and pencil marks have a huge impact on our health. So you can see that while genetic factors that are set in stone affect our traits through a process of hardwiring, epigenetic markers that are flexible really can affect our traits through a process of soft wiring. And this can explain why, for example, identical twins that have the same genes can actually become quite different also in their predisposition to disease as they age. So diet is one of the most powerful epigenetic pencils in your hands. And is certainly the best studied factor that affects our epigenome. Epigenetics is actually an opportunity for us to look at food not only as calories, but also as information. Food is really the most potent signal to our genes and to our epigenome, because it really modulates the activity of those epigenetic enzymes that can write, erase, and read epigenetic modifications. And one very famous example of these are bees. So queen bees are very different from the other bees in a beehive. They are larger, longer, they live 20 times longer, and they are fertile, whereas the other bees that are, they are called worker bees, are sterile. So now the most surprising thing is that actually queen bees and worker bees are genetically identical. And even more surprising is that the only difference is their diet. Only queen bees are fed royal jelly, which is a protein-rich substance secreted by the worker bees, which tells a lot about fairness in nature. But so the point is that the royal jelly is turning on genes that makes the queen a queen. But before you run to your local store to buy royal jelly, I have to warn you that royal jelly doesn't seem to work for people. We do have, however, some nutrients that are called epinutrients and seems to act through an epigenetic mechanism, and they are really our royal jelly. These nutrients include vitamins like vitamin B12, B6, B9 or folate, methionine, choline, and these are all, these nutrients in orange here are all required for really making the building blocks of the epigenome. Whereas the one in purple, polyphenols in tea, resveratrol in red wine, sulforaphane from broccoli, and butyrate, a compound that actually is produced by our microbiome. These are required to modulate the activity of epigenetic enzymes. So there are two different mechanisms here. But before you go home and drink a lot of red wine, I have to tell you that it seems that the dose required to have a significant effect is 40 liters per day. So just everything in moderation, even moderation. How can we use epigenetic to live a healthier, happier life? Well, I think it's all about moving from a paradigm of fear of disease to one of opportunity for health. Just think about your genes as your starting line in your health journey. And your lifestyle omics, including epigenetics, is your path to health, a path that you build every day. And why lifestyle omics matter? Look at that. This was a very famous paper published a few years ago, where you can see here, so the genetic risk on the x-axis, low, intermediate, and high for cardiovascular disease. And then people were divided in 3 groups, one with a favorable lifestyle, one intermediate lifestyle, and one unfavorable lifestyle. Well, as you can see here, if you have a high score and a favorable lifestyle, actually doesn't matter if you are in intermediate or high risk score group. You know, you're basically a good lifestyle and cancel out a high genetic risk. There's no difference, right? And this makes total sense. So I hope that by the end of this presentation, you can see that really you are unique in many ways. And one is your genes, the book your parents wrote for you. And the other is your lifestyle, the book that you write every day. And and diet is truly the best epigenetic pencil you have in your hands. And with this, I would like to thank you. And if you want, I do have a group of, I've started recently this year, a group of my class. I call that Epi Wellness. I just post whenever I can some studies or things about around epigenetics and diet. I try to do that, but I'm very bad with social media. Anyway, thank you very much for your attention.